guys hear me good? Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Like I said, I have a long-standing relationship with Farm Bureau. My brother, when we sold our sale barn, we used to own interstate livestock in Cuba. When he sold that, I believe it was '94, we went right to Farm Bureau. It's been there ever since. So again, a special connection there. So before we get started tonight, I want to reassure you that this is not some sort of down, heavy talk I have prepared for you tonight. We're going to talk about the problems. We're going to talk about the issues that we're facing. But most importantly, we're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about the stuff that we can actually do about it, because that's what's important. First recognizing the issues and then doing something about them. So I'll start off telling you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in my parents' cow-calf operation in just outside of Cuba. I am the youngest of 5 children. There are 25 years between myself and my oldest brother Chuck. There's a lot of people who don't know that I even exist, because a lot of people know my dad, know my brother, and knew the rest of the family, but I was kind of maybe a little bit of an afterthought. Some say I might have been an accident, but I like to think I'm the best accident my folks ever made. So I grew up, I went to Cuba High School, played baseball, football, was involved in my local 4-H, had steers at the county fair every year, but agriculture was nothing. I don't want to say I didn't take it serious, but it was something I sure took for granted. And I left for school for St. Louis College of Pharmacy in 2002, and the difference in Cuba and St. Louis, even though they're only about an hour and 15 minutes away, they may as well be a world away. I like to share. First time I experienced when I really realized I was somewhere different is I went downstairs. I think it was, I thought it was early. I think it was about 6 o'clock at night, and the dorms had stopped serving dinner. It's still light outside. Why is dinner being stopped? We never ate until it was dark outside. And I think I missed dinner. I had to cook ramen noodles in the microwave for about 2 weeks before I had it all figured out. I graduated in 2008 and moved back to. I worked at PCRMC, which is now Phelps Health outside in Rolla, and I worked as a pharmacist. I met my future wife there at Phelps Health. I always like to tell the story. She was a nurse there, and she ran right into me coming out of an ICU room, and she disputes that story a little bit. She said she didn't run into me, but we polled our boys on who they believed, and three out of our 4 boys believed me. So I'm gonna take that. So fast forward, that's been 13 years. And I just realized that these numbers are out of date, because we've obtained another dog and 2 more horses. My son bought his first roping horse, and then my other son brought another horse to work with home. So these numbers apparently are never up to date. So 4 boys, 2 dogs, 1 cat, 150 head cow-calf operation, 6 horses, and we just in 2014 we purchased another farm of our own. But throughout college and upon returning to home, I still continue to be involved. In fact, whenever I left for St. Louis and I shared the story with you how I'd taken my life for granted, I realized being involved in agriculture was something that was very important to me. It's something that I wanted to kind of continue that family legacy of that. And my dad helped me secure a first-time farmer loan from the FSA, and I think it was my freshman year of college when I returned home for winter break. And I bought my first set of cows, helped me pay my rent through college, and but even with, I had both of these both of these parts of me. I had my medical background, and I had my agriculture background, and somehow I wanted to combine these. And I didn't really know how that was ever going to come to fruition. They just seemed so separate. I didn't know how I wanted to do that. So in 2018, I began to find that mental health was something that was not only important to me, but it's something that needed to be important to everyone. We all needed to be talking about it, and I think 2018 was the time where we started seeing a lot of changes. We started seeing more and more people struggle with this, especially out in the open, and we realized that we were falling behind. And for me, I had my own personal struggles with anxiety, times depression, really questioning my value and questioning my self-worth. But I did get better, and I'll talk about some of the ways I got better here in a little bit. But I knew that I had improved, and I wanted to find a way to kind of combine my experience, combine my expertise, and share it with the people in agriculture. And then something happened in July of 2019. My wife and I were away at a conference in Dallas. It was late July. If you guys remember, 2019 was a pretty wet year. We didn't get our hay up till late. We had our county fair, so life had been on pause. So Carrie had this conference in Dallas, and I was going to show up on Saturday, and we were going to hang out for the weekend and come back home on Sunday. She'd driven down, and I flew down on Saturday morning. And we still had hay on the ground, though. And it was up to my dad, who was 83 at the time, and my son, who was 14 at the time, to get this hay put up. And, I felt pretty confident that everything was going to be okay, but he called me while I was sitting in the hotel room in Dallas. You feel one of those moments where you feel completely helpless, right? And he calls me and said, "Dad," he's baling hay, the dad baler's on fire. And, you just don't know, you don't know how to react in a situation like that. And, I was able to talk him through the situation. I was able to help him be calm, help him to try to extinguish the fire, but to understand whenever the fire was too far gone, he needed to get back and be safe, because, as you know, these tractors, when they catch fire, like a bomb. And he stepped away. We lost the tractor, but nobody was hurt. It was him on the tractor, not my 83-year-old dad who has COPD. And for me, I realized that I handled that situation much better than I would have a couple of years before. That a couple of years before, I probably would have made that 8-hour drive home from Dallas to, I don't know, thinking I could do something about it, but being able to accept everything that happened and just kind of be okay with it. And it was on that drive home when Carrie and I were talking about how can I understand that I had gotten better myself. How can I serve people like me? I knew there had to be people who felt the same way I did. And how do I serve other people like I've helped myself? And we kind of found out that the best way for us to reach people is for me to start a podcast. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I had zero clue how to start a podcast. I had no idea. I barely knew what a podcast was. But I listened to them. But I reached out to some friends who had podcasts, and well, they weren't friends at the time, but they have become friends from helping me out with all the stuff that I've done, and made it a reality. And just this past week, I released my 100th episode, just shy of 2 years, and it's been a really, really incredible journey, getting to talk to people from all over the States, but not just the States, people from Ireland, UK, Canada. It's been a really, really cool thing, a really cool way for me to help people deal with this. So, as I was saying, I have sort of a three-pronged approach to my podcast. One, I'm a healthcare provider. I'm a pharmacist. I'm not a mental health care provider by any means, but obviously I understand the healthcare system, how it works, and hopefully having conversations on how to navigate that. Two, I'm an ag producer. We have a 150 cow-calf operation. You know, I'm third generation where I'm at. Agriculture is a huge part of my life. Then I go back also, maybe the most significant is I've had my own battles. I've struggled with anxiety and depression like I was telling you all before, and I shouldn't say I've overcome it. I've learned to manage it. I think that's it's not something that you just cure, right? It's something that you have to learn to manage because it's not something that really goes away. But I've learned the best ways to deal with it. So I find that I have a very unique point of view on this, and it's been really interesting to see this kind of cycle of the ways that I can help people. So I want to start out, I'll talk about mental health and what is it. Who has it? Who should pay attention? And I promise you, every single person in this room has it. We all have mental health. It's not something that's good or bad. It's something that really exists on the spectrum. And it's something that we all can ebb and flow with from time to time. And every one of us, not only do we have it, but we should absolutely pay attention to it. And I always like to think of it in regards to getting your blood pressure checked at the doctor. Who gets their blood pressure checked at the doctor? Probably everybody, right? You know, not everybody in this room, I assume, has had a heart attack or a stroke. But we all still get our blood pressure taken because it's a preventative measure. I know that we should treat mental health in the same sort of fashion. We should have these preventative approaches to managing it so we can get out ahead of it and we don't have to hear the stories of people deciding to take their own lives, because we have to help people know that that's not the option. So how does it affect us in agriculture? Obviously, to do what we do, we have to live a somewhat secluded and isolated life. There was a meta-analysis that came out of BYU a few years ago, and it shows that a lack of social connection can be as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having an alcohol use disorder. And it's also as harmful as obesity. So all those things are pretty well documented that they're not great for our health. So to know that social isolation can be just as harmful or sometimes more harmful, I think it puts it into a pretty good perspective. And obviously, COVID pandemic has only amplified this. You know, when we do have connection, when we do have that social connection, it is at ball games, meetings like this one, which I'm very thankful that we are able to meet here this year, because that was something that was severely lacking last year. Fairs, we had our county fair canceled. We had county fairs all over the country. Not necessarily canceled, but they looked a lot different. So, you know, those forms of outlet, those forms of places where we do see folks throughout the pandemic, they were no longer available. So it made the effects of seclusion and isolation just amplified that much more. So I'm going to share a story here, and it has to do with the lack of control. And I'm going to actually just read this verbatim off of my notes here, because I wouldn't do it justice otherwise. So this is a situation, and I have had some part of this at one day or another. This is obviously an exaggerated example, but somebody I guarantee can relate to every part of this. So at the end of November, you have feed, insurance, taxes, and interest all due by the end of the year. It's time for you to wean your spring calves and get them shipped to help cover all those said expenses. Well, the day before you decide to load cattle, it rains 3 inches and turns cold, 35 degrees, which to me is the worst weather imaginable. The mud causes all this havoc while sorting that a few of the calves just push the gate open and they take off and bust out of the corral. I say this from a woman's perspective because I find that it's almost the most impactful. Your husband yells at your son to go get the gate closed. Being the good, obedient farm kid that he is, he hops up on the fence and jumps over, only to slip and land and break his arm while attempting to break his fall. You rush your son to the ER, which is about 30 miles away due to where you live, while your husband and the hired hand finish loading and sorting. After 3 hours of sorting, they finally get the calves onto the trailer and head up to the sale barn. On their way to the sale barn, there's a blowout on the stock trailer. Your husband calls up the neighbor and they bring their rig and back it up to yours and load the calves onto theirs. The calves finally make it to the sale barn that afternoon. But the next day, there's a fire at a packing plant out west, and the market drops out $10 to $15 a hundred, and you're forced to sell your cattle at a discount. We forgot about the son, didn't we? Well, it turns out his broken arm probably required surgery, and the only surgeon that was there was out of network on your insurance, and you'll be required to pay 20% out of pocket. So obviously, this is a worst case scenario, right? But I think everybody, like I said, can relate to every single part of this story, or there's a part within, and it's incredible. Sometimes the lack of control, because there's all these things that happened within here are things that have happened to some degree on my place at one time or another, and really they were things that nobody really had any control over, or we didn't know about beforehand. So that lack of control is obviously going to be a huge stressor. Then there's the misunderstanding of lifestyle, and I feel like with the emergence of social media that this has really been brought into focus over the last few years. The disconnect between the producer and the consumer is, I'd like to say it's getting better, but it's probably as wide as it's ever been. There's a misunderstanding at both the beginning and the end of the supply chain. Sorry guys, this is the slide. Sorry about that. So personally, for me, it's been animal activists who spew hateful rhetoric online. I had a situation earlier this year where they saw some pictures of my family. Somebody saw some pictures of my family on a social media site, and they were pictures with animals, pictures with, I think it was with their 4-H lambs, and they called me an animal abuser, which one thing or another, but called me a child abuser because of putting my kids through 4-H and subjecting them to that life. And obviously I can take it. I've developed a pretty thick skin over the years on these things, but that's not always the case for people. That can really, when you start throwing out accusations like that, and unfortunately that's not unheard of for people to do that, and people experience that on a daily basis. So that's obviously going to cause some stress. But those I could almost let pass. But there was one such situation that came about a couple of months before, whenever there was a local outlet that, it was actually a health organization, that put out this health calendar, a healthy living calendar, and it was talking about all these healthy recipes, and it started talking about withdrawing meat from the diet as a part of a healthy lifestyle. And to me, it was, in southern Missouri, which, cattle production is huge, and to find out that a local outlet like that was using that kind of rhetoric was really scary to me. I mean, I did take the initiative to reach out to them and let them know, hey, this may not be the best idea, but still, it just shows you that the disconnect is not just with people in urban areas. the disconnect is with people in rural areas as well. So this is the one I'm probably most guilty of, and that's comparison syndrome. Your house, please. It's an arrow cue catch, and my local feed store, every once in a while, would get one of these in and have them sitting out for, on display, and they would never last long. People would come by them, and man, they're cool. My kids would play with them, and you work with them, so you know how cool they are. They're awesome. They're the Cadillacs of sheep, as far as I'm concerned. Here's what we have. This is a WW livestock shoe, which is, they're good. They're really good. I was looking at it one day and said, this thing's probably not that old. And I got to looking around at it, some of the parts of it, and I saw a little sticker. We bought it from MFA in Rolla when MFA in Rolla still had a 314 area code. So I started to figure that out and realized it was almost 30 years old. So it still works, and it still provides a safe environment for myself and my kids. This was actually, I just realized this looking at this picture. This was my oldest son's there who's pushing the calf. That was his county fair 4-H steer this past year. So, but obviously, going back to that comparison syndrome. Every day on the way to work, I drive by a guy who has one of those chutes, and his place is absolutely immaculate. He's got pipe fence all the way around. It's just beautiful. His fence lines are always clear. His pastures are always clipped. When you have a town job and 4 kids and have a podcast and all the things I do, bush hogging your pasture sometimes goes out the back door. But I got to thinking one time on my way to work about how, man, this guy's place was really nice, and I was really envious of it. But I got to thinking, I bet he doesn't enjoy that somebody on their way to work every day can drive by and see his place. You know what I mean? My place, nobody sees it. I can not cut my grass for a month, nobody would know until my wife starts complaining about it. And that's something that I value that I probably didn't really think about until that point. So when we talk about comparison syndrome, we all have certain things, and whenever we're comparing, we all obviously a lot of times leave out context. So, and this is probably the biggest one. Stigma, and stigma definitely exists, and not being able to talk about it and being afraid to talk about it is something that I feel like is the pivotal and ultimate factor in this discussion. And it's kind of the Rubicon, because once we cross it, I feel like we have kind of turned the tides. Once it becomes, and we're getting there, right? I mean, the fact that I'm here today at a Missouri Farm Bureau conference is proof enough that we're starting the conversation, we're starting to do things right. But we got a long ways to go with it. We have a long ways to get to where it really needs to be. And you guys, as a group, farmers, ranchers, people in agriculture, are super independent. And that's not something that we want to take lightly or want to discount at all. But it's kind of a double-edged sword when we come into this kind of conversation, because it doesn't really lend itself to outside help very much. And that independent spirit, and that want to do it all yourself. You don't want to burden other people with your stuff, with your issues. And I'm here to say that although we should try to do our best to do things ourselves, it's not always the best option in reaching out. And there's always going to be people out there who are willing to help. So, what I say in the beginning, that I don't like to talk about problems unless I have solutions. And I'll share some of my own solutions and the solutions of others. So, the number one thing that has helped me in my journey to getting myself better is to increase how much I exercise. Now, being on a farm absolutely can be a lot of exercise. I mean, I've hauled square bales in the summer, I've cleaned stalls, I've done about all you can do on a cattle operation. But it's also a lot of riding around in a tractor too. It's a lot of sitting still. And it's hard to fit it in, I'm not going to lie. It's not something that I ever thought I would be able to fit in. This is a picture of my wife and I. This last year about this time we were out in Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's something that we have been able to take up together, and it's been probably, like I said, the number one thing that has helped me. And I'm living proof that it can be overcome, because I manage right now where I'm at to get 45 to 60 minutes of exercise 5 to 6 days a week. Now, how do I do that? I get up really early in the morning. I get up about 4:30 every morning to make sure I get it done, because there's not anything to compete with my time for that. Now, I understand that not everybody's going to do that. But I do think that somebody can start somewhere. 3 days a week for 20 minutes per day can go a long ways. And it really kind of helps you prioritize your time. And I can't say this enough, it's been the number one thing that has helped me, is increasing the amount of exercise I get. So, be fair to say that I'm not a full-time ag producer, and maybe my livelihood may not depend on me doing all the things that need to be done, and I'm not sure that's necessarily fair, but I can't really argue with it. But I will give you an example of my friend Jared McDaniel, who lives down in Oklahoma. He's a podcaster, has a podcast, corn and bean wheat farmer, husband and father of 6 kids, and he told me one time he still makes time to run every day, and he's going to run every day until he can't. And so if he can do it, I feel like there's a way for all of us to be able to fit it in. Now, we'll say again, sometimes it takes a back seat to what's important. There was a 2-week stretch this past year where, you guys know, in February we had record temperatures for time. I mean, I was out every morning from 4 to 6 before I got to go to work to chop ice, and then the same thing in the evening. And my son was off school because they didn't have school, and he was doing it during the day. So obviously I didn't fit in any quote-unquote exercise at that time, but I think I was getting probably plenty chopping times 12-inch thick guys. So if you do start to implement this, give yourself grace and give yourself the realization that plans they rarely work out. So another step, something that I've done is reading, journaling. Reading books and listening to podcasts, listening to books, things that, used to fill the time for me, where it used to be music, used to be other things, used to be talking on the phone with meaningless conversations, but now I try to fill that time with that dead time, like chores, driving, in a tractor, even exercise, like I talked about earlier. Filling that with really good information and really good things to help me along my way, because we think we don't have time. We say we don't have time to read, and we don't have time to fill ourselves with that information. And we may not be able to have time to sit down and read. I don't have time to sit down and read a book right now, but I do have time. On the way here, I was listening to an audiobook. So I mean, it's something that technology has made things much more accessible that we previously didn't think so before. And also journaling. I keep a journal every day of writing down the thoughts, planning my day. Just kind of almost like making a schedule for myself, but also kind of putting what my issues are down on paper. And it sounds silly, and it sounded silly to me, like, how can writing words down on a piece of paper make any sort of difference? But I'm here to tell you, it does make a difference, because you'll put these things down on a piece of paper, and then you'll read them, and either you'll realize, hey, yeah, something serious is going on, or you'll read them out loud and realize, oh, it's not that big a deal. So, that's something I really want to stress to people, that it's something that has helped me out tremendously. So, this one's probably going to be pretty controversial. Taking time away. I grew up with the assumption that you didn't take a whole lot of time away because there was too much to be done. And there is a lot to be done, don't get me wrong. At one time we had about 1,000 head of mommy cows. We don't have that many now. But there was a lot of work to be done. But being able to realize now that taking time away can help fill our cup so much, it's honestly, I'd have to say, it's probably saved my marriage. So I have two rules I like to talk about here. I have my rule of 5 and my rule of 2. My rule of 5 is regarding any sort of break. A break can last 5 minutes, 5 hours, or up to 5 days. But if you find yourself in a stressful situation, if you find yourself in a situation where things seem to be never going to be right, I stress to you the importance of taking that break. And even though you may lose a short bit of production in just that short amount of time, you're going to gain that on the back end of that and become way more productive. And that leads me into my rule of 2, and that's with my relationship with my wife. Rule of 2 is once every 2 weeks we take a date night where we go out into town, have a dinner an hour away. Like I said, we have 4 kids, so things can be hectic, crazy. Some might even call it a nightmare sometimes. We have 4 boys, and I've broken up my fair share of fist fights. I'll leave it at that. So especially for my wife, who is with them like in the summer all day, it's really important to get away once a week and just kind of hit that reset button. And then twice a year we go on a weekend trip away from our kids. And then once every 2 years we take a week away from our kids. And this may seem selfish, right? Especially when we only have 18 years with our kids, hopefully only 18, right? I have one that's 16 who's getting ready to go to college in a few years, so we'll find out. Time will tell if he really is. But, if you can take that time to be away from I don't want to take that break, to be away by yourself as a married couple, you will show up and be a much better, not only husband and wife, but a much better everything that you do, much better father and mother, much better at your job. It's just, I can't stress the importance of it. We found that out whenever our youngest was 1 year old. We went on our first vacation without kids, and gosh, we didn't know what it was like. And after that, we've made it a yearly thing to where, or try to make it a yearly thing. So I say the rule of 2, but I think we actually try to do it once a year to take at least 4 or 5 days away. So a friend of mine, Brian Alexander, he's a rancher out in Kansas, and I heard him one time on a podcast say, when everything seems to be wrong and nothing can fix it, go on vacation. Upon return, you'll find your solutions become very easy. I found out that no matter where we go, no matter when we leave, how long we're gone, my favorite part is coming back home to Missouri. Like I said in that picture earlier, we were in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana for a couple weeks this past summer. And the prettiest part of my entire time was when I turned south on 63 and started going back towards home off of I-70, because I just love home so much. So, sometimes being able to get away from it and turn it all off for a little bit helps you understand what you have and all the good things that you have going for you. So this is another friend of mine, Nathan Brown. He was guest on episode 48 of my podcast, and he has this story which to me is one of the most impactful stories I've ever heard regarding getting somebody help with their mental health. He had a friend who called him one time and said he had some hogs to get out and he needed help getting them back in, getting them loaded. And Nathan thought, gosh, I got a lot to do. This guy can not really handle those hogs by himself, or find somebody else, find somebody else. But he had that kind of thing in the back of his head that, probably need to go help this guy. Something seems out of sorts. So he went in, and like he thought, getting the hogs in, it wasn't a big deal. Getting the hogs loaded wasn't a big deal. But he had him over there, and he wanted to talk to him about his financial stresses. He wanted to talk to him about the stresses that he'd been having in his marriage, in his family. And it turns out that was the real reason he wanted Nathan to come over. He didn't really necessarily need his help to load hogs, but it was sure nice to have somebody to talk to. And I think it's really a really good lesson about how to be mindful about our others around us and about the actions of our neighbors. Like Garrett said, he had a neighbor who very easily could have lost his life if it hadn't have been for the help of some others. And how many lives can we possibly save just by being a friend, by being a good neighbor? And the story that Nathan shared kind of exemplifies that. So I'd be remiss if I didn't list some of my resources here that I always like to share. First one I share is a place out of Canada. It's a site out of Canada called the Do More Agriculture Foundation that was founded by four people who were involved in agriculture from some sort. And like I said, it's in Canada, but the lessons and the value that it brings knows really no bounds, knows no boundaries. And they have really incredible trainings, incredible stories. You can find that online at the DoMoreAgricultureFoundation.com. AgriSafe Network is another place that has some really incredible trainings around mental health, and they offer what's called QPR trainings, which are a place it's kind of like CPR for cardiac health. The QPR is like CPR for mental health. It's something where just a civilian can help out and find ways that they can help out. And NAMI, which is not agriculture-based, but it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. That's a place where they have the suicide hotline. And I have a whole list of these resources. I think there's probably up to 25 or 30 sites on my website, agstateofmind.com/mental health resources, and it's ever compiling. So if you guys ever come across any, please send them my way, and I'll add them to that list. So one thing I want to talk about too is, obviously, I'm a pharmacist, and I want to talk a little bit about medications that are used to treat our mental health. And so, unfortunately, there's a stigma that still exists around us, that you're somehow weak if you have to take some sort of medication, that these medications didn't exist for years and everybody seemed to get along just fine. Well, I'm here to tell you that they can be a very, very valuable tool when used correctly. I'll tell you right now, since about 2014, I've taken anti-anxiety medication, and I can tell you the difference it's made in me, but that would be nothing for those around me, my wife and my kids, to tell you how much it's changed me and how much of a better person it's made me. And they don't show that you're weak, but they can make you more complete. And it's not that you shouldn't do other things to treat and to do this, but they can be a really important tool, but obviously something that you should consult your physician about. And I'll talk a little bit about counseling too. I've used lots of counseling services. I've just actually found something called BetterHelp online, which is really nice when you live 20 miles from town. It's something if you have a decent internet connection, which again, that's a problem for a lot of us. I know it is for me. You know, that's something that can really be helpful without having to drive to town, or even for someone to see your truck at said mental health provider. So just to close here, I want to talk about my podcast, where you can find it. It's on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, all the places. And then I post links to them on all of my social media, Ag State of Mind, all across social media. And I want to close here tonight and let you all know that we as agriculture producers are so vital. And no matter how you're feeling, no matter how either successful or sometimes maybe even unsuccessful you may seem like you are, or you may feel like you are, you're important to someone. You're important to everyone in this room, because when one of us is affected, all of us are. And you know, I encourage every one of you to reach out to your neighbors, get to know your neighbors, try to find out what's going on with them, and we'll be better for it. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.